Hello, everybody. Good grief. There's people on. Good grief. Hello. Hype train? Oh my god. How'd that happen? Oh dear. Hello, everybody. Right. It got delayed when the point stuck. Ah. Oops. Right. Didn't actually mean to have that long a intro, but I was kind of stuck. Oh, hi, Rim. Sorry. My apologies there. Okay. So, be aware you are on stream, so keep it cleanish, I guess. Right. Right. No PC, no lockup. Right, that's better. Oh dear. No ticking down the Geneva to-do list. No, if you could not. Ah, no problem, Alia. Your attention, whatever it is always very welcome, as is everybody's. I'm having a bit of a jittery day today, and I don't know why. Right. Okay, so possibly going to be a 2-sessioner. So I may well start this week and finish next week. We shall see how it goes, since I'm starting later than I wanted. So, yeah, random days, just yeah, exactly. Okie dokie. After he got mentioned at the end of Watson is Not an Idiot in the list of supernatural detectives and weird stuff, and I need to clean my glasses, excuse me one moment, I decided to go back to Thomas Carnacki by William Hope Hodgson. I've done a couple of Carnackis in the past, but I've always kind of held off on this one. Not sure why, apart from the fact it does indeed come with the content warning of animal death. Specifically a cat, which we have not had the chance to get attached to. It is not bought as a pet. It just doesn't live very long. So it's not gory particularly, it's just be aware. So, some bookkeeping out of the way there. That's very appropriate, KB. Welcome to book club, and welcome to William Hope I'm a Weirdo Hodgson. Bodybuilder, sailor, personal trainer, writer, died when he was about 35. He's one of those people you're just going, where did you fit it all in? Got into fitness because he was a fairly short person who got bullied as a sailor and decided to get into bodybuilding. And everything kind of spiraled from there. Fish aware cat. Yike. Okay. Let's actually move that up so I can see all of the window. That would be ideal. From Carnacki the Ghost Finder. Oh, absolutely, KB. He's one of the people who never sleeps. Hope he does now. He's dead. But, wouldn't put it past him. From Carnacki the Ghost Finder by William Hope Hodgson. The Gateway of the Monster. In response to Carnacki's usual card of invitation to have dinner and listen to a story, I arrived promptly at 427 Chain Walk to find the three others who were always invited to these happy little times there before me. 5 minutes later, Carnacki, Arkwright, Jessup, Taylor, and I were all engaged in the pleasant occupation of dining. "You've not been long away this time," I remarked as I finished my soup, forgetting momentarily Carnacki's dislike of being asked to even skirt the borders of his story until such time as he was ready, and then he would not stint words. "That's all," he replied with brevity, and I changed the subject, remarking that I had been buying a new gun, to which piece of news he gave an intelligent nod and a smile which I think showed a genuinely good-humoured appreciation of my intentional changing of the conversation. Later, when dinner was finished, Carnacki snugged himself comfortably down in his big chair along with his pipe, and began his story with very little circumlocution. "As Dodgson was remarking just now, I've only been away a short time, and for a very good reason, too. I've only been away a short distance. The exact locality, I'm afraid I must not tell you, but it is less than 20 miles from here. Though, except for changing a name, that won't spoil the story. And it is a story, too. One of the most extraordinary things ever I've run against. I received a letter a fortnight ago from a man I must call Anderson, asking for an appointment. I arranged a time, and when he came, I found that he wished me to investigate and see whether I could not clear up a long-standing and, well, too well, authenticated case of what he termed haunting. He gave me very full particulars, and finally, as the case seemed to present something unique, I decided to take it up. 2 days later, I drove to the house late in the afternoon. I found it a very old place, standing quite alone in its own grounds. Anderson had left a letter with the butler, I found, pleading excuses for his absence and leaving the whole house at my disposal for my investigations. The butler evidently knew the object of my visit, and I questioned him pretty thoroughly during dinner, which I had in rather lonely state. He is an old and privileged servant, and had the history of the grey room exact in detail. From him I learned more particulars regarding 2 things that Anderson had mentioned in but a casual manner. The first was that the door of the grey room would be heard in the dead of night to open and slam heavily, and this even though the butler knew it was locked and the key on the bunch in his pantry. The second was that the bedclothes would always be found torn off the bed and hurled in a heap into a corner. But it was the door slamming that chiefly bothered the old butler. Many and many a time, he told me, had he lain awake and just got shivering with fright listening, for sometimes the door would be slammed time after time, thud, 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 so that sleep was impossible. From Anderson, I knew already that the room had a history extending back over 150 years. 3 people had been strangled in it, an ancestor of his and his wife and child. This is authentic, as I had taken very great pains to discover, so that you can imagine it was with the feeling I had a striking case to investigate that I went upstairs after dinner to have a look at the grey room. Peter, the old butler, was in rather a state about my going, and assured me with much solemnity that in all the 20 years of his service no one had ever entered that room after nightfall. He begged me, in quite a fatherly way, to wait till the morning, when there would be no danger, and then he could accompany me himself. Of course, I smiled a little at him and told him not to bother. I explained that I should do no more than look around a bit and perhaps affix a few seals. He need not fear. I was used to that sort of thing, but he shook his head when I said that. There isn't many ghosts like ours, sir, he assured me with mournful pride, and by Jove, he was right, as you will see. I took a couple of candles, and Peter followed me with his bunch of keys. He unlocked the door, but would not come inside with me. He was evidently in a fright, and he renewed his request that I put off my examination until daylight. Of course, I laughed at him again and told him he could stand sentry at the door and catch anything that came out. "It never comes outside, sir," he said in his funny old solemn manner. Somehow he managed to make me feel as if I were going to have the creeps right away. Anyway, it was one to him, you know. I left him there and examined the room. She's not like the other ghosts. Yes, I will. I left him there and examined the room. It's a big apartment and well furnished in the grand style, with a huge four-poster which stands with its head to the end wall. There were 2 candles on the mantelpiece and 2 on each of the 3 tables that were in the room. I lit the lot, and after that the room felt a little less inhumanly dreary. Though, mind you, it was quite fresh and well kept in every way. Hey, Greno. We're on room descriptions. I think you could probably have a halfway decent D&D fight in this place. Mind you, by the sounds of it, you could play a halfway decent game of 5-a-side. After I had taken a good look round, I sealed lengths of baby ribbon across the windows, along the walls, over the pictures, and over the fireplace and the wall closets. Anyone living in a modern house is going, "It's got how much built-in storage? It's got cupboards?" I know, it's awful, isn't it? You'd be willing to put up with it being haunted. A 4-poster bed and a floor space and tables and access to storage. Good Lord. Sorry. I don't know why it suddenly leapt into my head. All the time as I worked, the butler just stood without the door, and I could not persuade him to enter. Though I jested him a little as I stretched the ribbons and went here and there about my work. How many iceboxes? Probably at least one large one. It's 1913 here. The house is, 150 years old. So it would probably have had something dug into the ground in the scullery. Sorry. Though I jested him a little as I stretched the ribbons and went here and there about my work, every now and then he would say, "You'll excuse me, sir, I'm sure, but I do wish you would come out, sir. I'm fair in a quake for you." I told him he need not wait, but he was loyal enough in his way to what he considered his duty. He said he could not go away and leave me all alone there. He apologised, but made it very clear that I did not realise the danger of the room, and I could see generally that he was in a pretty frightened state. All the same, I had to make the room so that I should know if anything material entered it, so I asked him not to bother me unless he really heard or saw something. He was beginning to get on my nerves, and the feel of the room was bad enough without making it any nastier. Ruthie Cat wants to play Kate B, but sadly it seems the only game you've successfully taught her is chase the toy mama through, and you can't really throw the dangle toy. Oh no. I have great luck with cats and those rubber band fishing lines. The only problem is they always tend to figure out how to climb them, at which point you ended up with a cat dangling off the end of a stick. For a time further, I worked, stretching ribbons across the floor and sealing them so that the merest touch would have broken them, were anyone to venture into the room in the dark with the intention of playing the fool. All this had taken me far longer than I anticipated, and suddenly I heard a clock strike 11. I'd taken off my coat soon after commencing work. Now, however, as I had practically made an end of all that I intended to do, I walked across to the settee and picked it up. I was in the act of getting into it when the old butler's voice, he had not said a word for the last hour, came sharp and frightened. "Come out, sir, quick! There's something going to happen." Jove, but I jumped, and then in the same moment one of the candles on the table to the left went out. Now, whether it was the wind or what, I do not know, but just for a moment I was enough startled to make a run for the door, though I'm glad to say that I pulled up before I reached it. I simply could not bunk out with the butler standing there, after having, as it were, read him a sort of lesson on being brave, you know. So I just turned right round, picked up the 2 candles off the mantelpiece, and walked across to the table near the bed. Well, I saw nothing. I blew out the candle that was still alight, then I went to those on the 2 tables and blew them out. Then outside the door, the old man called again. "Oh, sir, do be told, do be told!" "Right, Peter," I said, and by Jove, my voice was not as steady as I should have liked. I made for the door, and had a bit of work not to start running. I took some thundering long strides, as you can imagine. Near the door I had a sudden feeling that there was a cold wind in the room. It was almost as if the window had been suddenly opened a little. I got to the door, and the old butler gave back a step in sort of an instinctive way. "Collar the candles, Peter," I said pretty sharply, and shoved them into his hands. I turned and caught the handle and slammed the door shut with a crash. Somehow, as I did so, I thought I felt something pull back on it, but it must have only been fancy. I turned the key in the lock, and then again double-locking the door. I felt easier then, and set to and sealed the door. In addition, I put my card over the keyhole and sealed it there, after which I pocketed the key and went downstairs, with Peter, who was nervous and silent, leading the way. Poor old beggar. It had not struck me until that moment that he'd been enduring a considerable strain during the last 2 or 3 hours. About midnight I went to bed. My room lay at the end of the corridor upon which opens the door of the grey room. I counted the doors between it and mine, and found that 5 rooms lay between, and I'm sure you can understand that I was not sorry. Then, just as I was beginning to undress, an idea came to me, and I took my candle and sealing wax and sealed the doors of all 5 rooms. If any door slammed in the night, I should know just which one. I returned to my room, locked the door, and went to bed. I was waked suddenly from a deep sleep by a loud crash somewhere out in the passage. I sat up in bed and listened, but heard nothing. Then I lit my candle. I was in the very act of lighting it when there came a bang of a door being violently slammed along the corridor. I jumped out of bed and got my revolver. I unlocked the door and went out into the passage, holding my candle high and keeping the pistol ready. And then a queer thing happened. I could not go a step toward the grey room. You all know I'm not really a cowardly chap. I've gone into too many cases connected with ghostly things to be accused of that. But I tell you, I funked it, simply funked it just like any blessed kid. There was something precious unholy in the air that night. I ran back into my bedroom and shut and locked the door, and then I sat on the bed all night and listened to the dismal thudding of a door up the corridor. The sound seemed to echo through all the house. Daylight came at last, and I washed and dressed. The door had not slammed for about an hour, and I was getting back my nerve again. I felt ashamed of myself, though in some ways it was silly, for when you're meddling with that sort of thing, your nerve is bound to go sometimes, and you just have to sit quiet and call yourself a coward until daylight. Sometimes it's more than just cowardice, I fancy. I believe at times it is something warning you and fighting for you, but all the same, I always feel mean and miserable after a time like that. When the day came properly, I opened my door, and, keeping my revolver handy, went quietly along the passage. I had to pass the head of the stairs along the way, and who should I see coming up but the old butler, carrying a cup of coffee. He'd merely tucked his nightshirt into his trousers, and he had an old pair of carpet slippers on. Hello, Peter, I said, feeling suddenly cheerful, for I was as glad as any lost child to have a live human being close to me. Where are you off to with the refreshments? The old man gave a start and slopped some of the coffee. He stared up at me, and I could see that he looked white and done up. He came on up the stairs and held out the little tray to me. I'm very thankful indeed, sir, to see you're safe and well, he said. I feared one time you might risk going into the grey room, sir. I've lain awake all night with the sound of the door, and when it came light I thought I'd make you a cup of coffee. I knew you'd want to look at the seals, and somehow it seems safer if there's two, sir. Peter, I said, you're a brick. This is very thoughtful of you, and I drank the coffee. Come along, I told him, and handed him back the tray. I'm going to have a look at what the brutes have been up to. I simply hadn't the pluck to in the night. Hello, Honeybee Charm. And yes, Peter we like. Peter has some common sense. And also turns up with coffee. We like Peter. I'm very thankful, sir, he replied. Flesh and blood can do nothing, sir, against devils, and that's what's in the grey room after dark. I examined the seals on all the doors as I went along and found them right. But when I got to the grey room, the seal was broken, though the card over the keyhole was untouched. I ripped it off and unlocked the door and went in, rather cautiously, as you can imagine, but the whole room was empty of anything to frighten one, and there was heaps of light. I examined all my seals, and not a single one was disturbed. The old butler had followed me in, and suddenly he called out, "The bedclothes, sir." I ran up to the bed and looked over, and surely they were lying in the corner and to the left of the bed. Jove, you could imagine how queer I felt. Something had been in the room. I stared for a while, from the bed to the clothes on the floor. I had a feeling that I did not want to touch either. Old Peter, though, did not seem affected that way. He went over to the bed coverings and was going to pick them up, as doubtless he had done every day these 20 years back. But I stopped him. I wanted nothing touched until I had finished my examination. This I must have spent a full hour over, and then I let Peter straighten up the bed, after which we went out and I locked the door, for the room was getting on my nerves. I had a short walk and then breakfast, after which I felt more my own man, and so returned to the grey room, and with Peter's help and one of the maids, I had everything taken out of the room except the bed, even the very pictures. I examined the walls, floor, and ceiling then, with probe, hammer, and magnifying glass, but found nothing suspicious. And I can assure you, I began to realise in very truth that some incredible thing had been loose in the room during the past night. I sealed up everything again and went out, locking and sealing the door as before. After dinner, Peter and I unpacked some of my stuff, and I fixed up my camera and flashlight opposite to the door of the grey room, with a string from the trigger of the flashlight to the door. Then, you see, if the door were really opened, the flashlight would blare out, and there would be possibly a very queer picture to examine in the morning. The last thing I did before leaving was to uncap the lens, and after that I went off to my bedroom and to bed, for I intended to be up at midnight, and to ensure this I set my little alarm to call me. Also, I left my candle burning. Honeybee, found your great-grandfather's jewellery-making tools in your grandmother's art studio. Oh, wow. Are you into jewellery making, or is this something you'd like to be? The clock woke me at 12, and I got up and into my dressing gown and slippers. I shoved my revolver into my right side pocket and opened my door. You love jewellery making. Oh, wonderful. I've got some stuff, but I'm not very good at it yet. Oh, this is gem cutting stuff. Oh, wow. Now that is something I would be really interested in. Love watching gem cutting, but yeah, I'm not something I've tried. B is very good at art, rather good at art in general. Oh, excellent. I know so many people who are good at art. I shoved my revolver into my right side pocket and opened my door. Then I lit my darkroom lamp and withdrew the slide so that it would give a clear light. I carried it up the corridor about 30 feet and put it down on the floor with the open side away from me, so that it would show me anything that might approach along the dark passage. Then I went back and sat in the doorway of my room with my revolver handy, staring up the passage toward the place where I knew my camera stood outside the door of the grey room. I should think I'd watched for about an hour and a half, when suddenly I heard a faint noise away up the corridor. I was immediately conscious of a queer prickling sensation about the back of my head, and my hands began to sweat a little. The following instant, the whole end of the passage flicked into sight at the abrupt glare of the flashlight. There came the succeeding darkness, and I peered nervously up the corridor, listening tensely and trying to find what lay beyond the faint glow of my dark lamp, which now seemed ridiculously dim by contrast with the tremendous blaze of the flash powder. And then as I stooped forward, staring and listening, there came the crashing thud of the door of the grey room. The sound seemed to fill the whole of the large corridor and go echoing hollowly through the house. I tell you, I felt horrible, as if my bones were water. Simply beastly. Jove, how did I stare and how I listened! And then it came again. Thud, thud, thud. And then a silence that was almost worse than the noise of the door, for I kept fancying that some awful thing was stealing upon me along the corridor. And then suddenly my lamp was put out, and I could not see a yard before me. I realised all at once that I was doing a very silly thing sitting there, and I jumped back. Even as I did so, I thought I heard a sound in the passage and quite near me. I made one backward spring into my room and slammed and locked the door. I sat on my bed and stared at the door. I had my revolver in my hand, but it seemed an abominably useless thing. I felt that there was something the other side of that door. For some reason, I knew it was pressed up against the door and it was soft. That's just what I thought. Most extraordinary thing to think. Presently, I got a hold of myself a bit and marked out a pentacle hurriedly with chalk on the polished floor, and then I sat in it almost until dawn. And all the time, away up the corridor, the door of the grey room thudded at solemn and horrid intervals. It was a miserable, brutal night. Oh, yes, Honeybee, if you are up for it, I would be very interested to see your efforts in, we have an arts and crafts channel. No pressure, but yeah. You just made 3 different pairs of hair jewellery in 3 days. Okay. My productivity now looks pathetic. But yeah, absolutely love to see some of that. I love seeing what other people have done. When the day began to break, the thudding of the door came gradually to an end, and at last I got hold of my courage and went along the corridor in the half-light to cap the lens of my camera. I can tell you it took some doing, but if I'd not done so, my photograph would have been spoilt, and I was tremendously keen to save it. I got back to my room and then set to and rubbed out the 5-pointed star in which I had been sitting. Half an hour later, there was a tap at my door. It was Peter with my coffee. When I'd drunk it, we both went along to the grey room. As we went, I had a look at the seals on the other doors, but they were untouched. The seal on the grey room was broken, as also was the string from the trigger of the flashlight. But the card over the keyhole was still there. I ripped it off and opened the door. Nothing unusual was to be seen until we came to the bed. Then I saw that, as on the previous day, the bedclothes had been torn off and hurled into the left-hand corner, exactly where I'd seen them before. I felt very queer, but I did not forget to look at all the seals, only to find that not one had been broken. Then I turned and looked at old Peter, and he looked at me, nodding his head. "Let's get out of here," I said. "It's no place for any living human to enter without proper protection." We went out then, and I locked and sealed the door again. After breakfast, I developed the negative, but it showed only the door of the grey room, half opened. Then I left the house, as I wanted to get certain matters and implements that might be necessary to life, perhaps to the spirit. I intended to spend the coming night in the grey room. I got back in a cab about 5:30 with my apparatus, and this Peter and I carried up to the grey room, where I piled it carefully in the centre of the floor. When everything was in the room, including a cat which I had bought, I locked and sealed the door and went toward the bedroom, telling Peter I would not be down for dinner. He said, "Yes, sir," and went downstairs, thinking that I was going to turn in, which is what I wanted him to believe, as I knew he would have worried both me and himself if he'd known what I intended. But I merely got my camera and flashlight from my bedroom and hurried back to the grey room. I locked and sealed myself in and set to work, for I had a lot to do before it got dark. First, I cleared away all the ribbons across the floor. Then I carried the cat, still fastened in its basket, over toward the far wall and left it. I returned then to the centre of the room and measured out a space 21 feet in diameter, which I swept with a broom of hyssop. After this, I drew a circle of chalk, taking care never to step over the circle. Beyond this, I smudged with a bunch of garlic a broad belt right around the chalked circle. And when this was complete, I took from among my stores in the centre a small jar of a certain water. I broke away the parchment and withdrew the stopper. Then, dipping my left forefinger in the little jar, I went round the circle again, making upon the floor, just within the line of chalk, the second sign of the Sama ritual, and joining each sign most carefully with the left-handed crescent. I can tell you I felt easier when this was done and the water circle complete. Then I unpacked some more of the stuff that I bought and placed a lighted candle in the valley of each crescent. After that, I drew a pentacle so that each of the 5 points of the defensive star touched the chalk circle. In the 5 points of the star, I placed 5 portions of the bread, each wrapped in linen, and in the 5 veils, 5 open jars of the water I had used to make the water circle. And now I had my first protective barrier complete. You know, just reading that and thinking, yep, that's several skill checks, isn't it? In any game you care to name. So very many things could go wrong. Or one extended check, yeah. Yeah, an extended check would cut it. But mess it up and you have to clean everything and start again. Now, anyone except you who knows something of my methods of investigation might consider all this a piece of useless and foolish superstition. But you all remember the Black Veil case, in which I believe my life was saved by a very similar form of protection, whilst Asta, who sneered at it and would not come inside, died. I got the idea from the Sigsand manuscript, written, so far as I can make out, in the 14th century. Yes, indeed. No, you cannot take 20 on it. It's the sort of thing you could do with a group check, though. Various people drawing different elements. I just had a vision of a ghost hunter with an allium allergy using this and having to deal with the garlic. The prep stuff, you could take 10. I think, yeah. I think in order to make sure you had everything and that it was all inside the circle, just bear in mind how big it's got to be. People forget. I've seen, on TV and such, people do a circle maybe a couple of feet across, maybe a meter across. And that's fine if you're standing still. If you're planning on spending an entire night somewhere, you need the full de Richelieu. And Techie coming up with the opposite timing or incentive to buy me a coffee on Ko-fi. TV's limited to what they can fit in the camera shot. True. It's also limited by the fact that they quite often only think in terms of how long is the actor going to be standing there, not how long the character's going to be there. The Christopher Lee version of The Devil Rides Out is not a particularly faithful adaptation of the book, but it does feature one of the best examples of a vigil like this. And they have multiple people inside one of these circles, manning it the entire night and unable to leave. And that you feel very glad that the set is basically a massive bedroom with a wooden floor. And even that's not as complicated as this one. At first, naturally, I imagined it was just an expression of the superstition of his time, and it was not until a year later that it occurred to me to test his defence, which I did, as I've just said, in that horrible Black Veil case. You know how that turned out. Later, I used it several times, and always I came through safe until that moving fur case. It was only a partial defence, therefore, and I nearly died in the pentacle. After that, I came across Professor Garda's experiments with a medium. When they surrounded the medium with a current in vacuum, he lost his power, almost as if it cut him off from the immaterial. That made me think a lot, and that's how I came to make the electric pentacle, which is the most marvellous defence against certain manifestations. I have used the shape of the defensive star for this protection because I have, personally, no doubt at all but that there is some extraordinary virtue in the old magic figure. Curious thing for a 20th century man to admit, isn't it? But then, as you all know, I never did and never will allow myself to be blinded by a little cheap laughter. I ask questions, and I keep my eyes open. In this last case, I had little doubt that I'd run up against a supernatural monster, and I meant to take every possible care, for the danger is abominable. I turned to now to fit the electric pentacle, setting it so that each of its points and veils coincided exactly with the points and veils of the drawn pentagram upon the floor. Then I connected up the battery, and the next instant the pale blue glare from the intertwining vacuum tubes shone out. I glanced about me then with something of a sigh of relief, and realised suddenly that the dusk was upon me, for the window was grey and unfriendly. Then round at the big, empty room over the double barrier of electric and candlelight, I had an abrupt, extraordinary sense of weirdness thrust upon me. You keep hearing electric time trousers instead of pentacle. Yeah, I can see that, Grona. I still maintain that the electric pentacle needs to be a bar. I'm not sure what in, but it needs to be a bar in something. Kind of see that being, round the corner from the laundry. You think it's a Blade Runner bar, or Shadowrun bar, goth band? Yeah, all of the above. Fish, where's that damn monkey? Jeffrey, yes. Oh, Professor Elemental gets a ref. Yeah, I like the idea of a goth bar called the Electric Pentacle, which is literally round the corner from like the Milton Keynes office of the laundry, and everyone drinks in there just because they have a sense of irony, and none of the locals can work out why all these civil servants have suddenly started drinking in the goth rock bar. It kind of appeals, actually. I may have to put that in. I had an abrupt, extraordinary sense of weirdness thrust upon me, in the air, as it were, a sense of something inhuman impending. The room was full of the stench of bruised garlic, a smell I hate. Fish, we have a proposed Shadowrun game. Start writing your adventure for us, and we really must play Blade Runner sometime. Yes, we must play Blade Runner. I want to play it. I don't think I backed it. I'm fairly sure I didn't back it. I'm fairly sure I couldn't afford it at the time. I need to start writing a scenario for Shadowrun, do I? Okay. Well, I've got my list of noir stuff. I did. Oh, I may have backed it only for the basics. Yeah, not any of the other books. I'll have to check. It was definitely one that I wanted. I turned now to the camera and saw that it and the flashlight were in order. Then I tested my revolver carefully, though I had little thought that it would be needed. Yet to what extent materialization of an abnatural creature is possible, given favourable conditions, no one can say, and I had no idea what horrible thing I was going to see or feel the presence of. I might in the end have to fight with a materialized monster. I did not know and could only be prepared. Yeah, that's right, Fish PDF only, and I didn't back the second one. I couldn't. But yeah, I do have. Yes, because it was about the same time as Alien. So I backed, basically, I think for that month or so, Pre-League had far too much of my bank balance. Pardon me. Excuse me one moment while I have a drink. You see, I never forgot that 3 other people had been strangled in the bed close to me, and that the fierce slamming of the door I had heard myself. I had no doubt, I was investigating a dangerous and ugly case. By this time the night had come, though the room was very light with the burning candles, and I found myself glancing behind me constantly and then all round the room. It was a nervy work waiting for that thing to come. And then suddenly I was aware of a little cold wind sweeping over me, coming from behind. I gave one great nerve thrill, and a prickly feeling went all over the back of my head. And then I hove myself round with a sort of stiff jerk and stared straight against that queer wind. It seemed to come from the corner of the room to the left of the bed, the place where both times I'd found the heap of tossed bedclothes, yet I could see nothing unusual, no opening, nothing. Abruptly I was aware that the candles were all a-flicker in that unnatural wind. I believe I just squatted there and stared in a horribly frightened wooden way for some minutes. I shall never be able to tell you how disgustingly horrible it was, sitting in that vile cold wind. And then flick, 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 all the candles round the outer barrier went out. And there was I, locked and sealed in that room, and with no light beyond the weakish blue glare of the electric pentacle. A time of abominable tenseness passed, and still that wind blew upon me. And then suddenly I knew that something stirred in the corner to the left of the bed. I was made conscious of it, rather by some inward unused sense than by either sight or sound, for the pale short radius glare of the pentacle gave but a poor light for seeing by. Yet as I stared, something began slowly to grow upon my sight, a moving shadow a little darker than the surrounding shadows. I lost the thing amid the vagueness, and for a moment or two I glanced swiftly from side to side with a fresh new sense of impending danger, and then my attention was directed to the bed. All the coverings were being drawn steadily off with a hateful, stealthy sort of motion. I heard the slow, dragging slither of the clothes, but I could see nothing of the thing that pulled. I was aware in a funny subconscious, introspective fashion that the creep had come upon me, yet that I was cooler mentally than I'd been for some minutes. Sufficiently so to feel that my hands were sweating coldly, and to shift my revolver half-consciously while I rubbed my right hand dry upon my knee, though never for an instant taking my gaze or my attention from those moving clothes. Fish. You've so much Free League stuff. Corioli. Forbidden Lands, Blade Runner. I keep forgetting about Forbidden Lands. Twilight 2000, Tales from the Loop. Now you have to do a unified theory. Hiram, Queerwind is going to be on the scene name. The faint noises from the bed ceased once, and there was a most intense silence with only the sound of the blood beating in my head. Yet immediately after, I heard again the slurring of the bedclothes being dragged off the bed. In the midst of my nervous tension, I remembered the camera and reached round for it, but without looking away. And then, all in a moment, the whole of the bed coverings were torn off with extraordinary violence, and I heard the flump they made as they were hurled into the corner. There was a time of absolute quietness then, for perhaps a couple of minutes, and you can imagine how horrible I felt. The bedclothes had been thrown with such savageness, and then again the brutal unnaturalness of the thing that had just been done before me. Abruptly, over by the door, I heard a faint noise, a sort of crickling sound, and then a pitter or two upon the floor. A great nervous thrill swept over me, seeming to run up my spine and over the back of my head, for the seal that had secured the door had just been broken. Something was there. I couldn't see the door, at least I mean to say it was impossible to say how much I actually saw and how much my imagination supplied. I made it out, only as a continuation of the grey walls, and then it seemed to me that something dark and indistinct moved and wavered there among the shadows. Abruptly, I was aware that the door was opening, and with an effort I reached again for my camera, but before I could aim it, the door was slammed with a terrific crash that filled the whole room with a sort of hollow thunder. I jumped like a frightened child. There seemed like such a power behind the noise, as though a vast wanton force were out. Can you understand? The door was not touched again, but directly afterward I heard the basket in which the cat lay creak. I tell you, I was fairly pringled all along my back. I knew that I was going to learn definitely whether whatever was abroad was dangerous to life. From the cat there rose suddenly a hideous caterwaul, then ceased abruptly, and then, too late, I snapped off the flashlight. In the great glare I saw that the basket had been overturned and the lid was wrenched open, with the cat lying half in and half out upon the floor. I saw nothing else, but I was full of the knowledge that I was in the presence of some being or thing that had power to destroy. During the next 2 or 3 minutes there was an odd, noticeable quietness in the room, and you must remember I was half blinded for the time because of the flashlight, so the whole place seemed to be pitchy dark just beyond the shine of the pentacle. I tell you, it was most horrible. I just knelt there in the star and whirled round, trying to see whether anything was coming at me. My power of sight came gradually, and I got a little hold of myself, and abruptly I saw the thing I was looking for close to the water circle. It was big and indistinct, and wavered curiously as though the shadow of a vast spider hung suspended in the air, just beyond the barrier. It passed swiftly round the circle and seemed to probe ever toward me, but only to draw back with an extraordinary jerky movement, as might a living person if they touched a hot bar of a grate. Round and round it moved, and round I turned. Then, just opposite to one of the veils in the pentacle, it seemed to pause, as though preliminary to a tremendous effort. It retired almost beyond the glow of the vacuum light, and then came straight toward me, appearing to gather form and solidity as it came. There seemed a vast malign determination behind the movement that must succeed. I was on my knees, and I jerked back, falling onto my left hand and hip in a wild endeavour to get back from the advancing thing. With my right hand I was grabbing madly for my revolver, which I'd let slip. The brutal thing came with one great sweep, straight over the garlic and the water circle, almost to the veil of the pentacle. I believe I yelled. Then, just as suddenly as it swept over, it seemed to be hurled back by some mighty invisible force. It must have been some moments before I realised that I was safe, and then I got myself together in the middle of the pentacles, feeling horribly gone and shaken, and glancing round and round the barrier, but the thing had vanished. Yet I'd learnt something, for I knew now that the grey room was haunted by a monstrous hand. Suddenly, as I crouched there, I saw what had so nearly given the monster an opening through the barrier. In my movements within the pentacle, I must have touched one of the jars of water, for just where the thing had made its attack, the jar that guarded the deep of the veil had been moved to one side, and this had left one of the 5 doorways unguarded. I put it back quickly, and felt almost safe again, for I'd found the cause and the defence was still good. And I began to hope again that I should see the morning come in. When I saw that thing so nearly succeed, I had an awful, weak, overwhelming feeling that the barriers could never bring me safe through the night against such a force. You can understand. Yuck. Which yuck? Now I'm worried. Yeah, I do kind of feel for the cat. That's why I content warned for it. For a long time I couldn't see the hand, but presently I thought I saw once or twice an odd wavering over among the shadows near the door. A little later, as though in a sudden fit of malignant rage, the dead body of the cat was picked up and beaten with dull, sickening blows against the solid floor. That made me feel rather queer. Spider's okay, giant spider can do with it, giant hands, oh no. Oh, sorry, Hiram. A minute afterward, the door was opened and slammed twice with tremendous force. The next instant, the thing made one swift, vicious dart at me from out of the shadows. Instinctively, I started sideways from it, and so plucked my hand from upon the electric pentacle where, for a wickedly careless moment, I'd placed it. The monster was hurled off from the neighbourhood of the pentacles, though, owing to my inconceivable foolishness, it had been enabled for a second time to pass the outer barriers. I can tell you I shook for a time with sheer funk. I moved right to the centre of the pentacles again and knelt there, making myself as small and compact as possible. Okay, I'll give that a moment. While the ad break runs, to those of you who can still hear, thank you very much for your support. I always feel awkward saying thank you for this. I appreciate the help in paying my electricity bill. Without which I would not be able to do these streams. You're back from ads. Okay. How's everybody else? Anyone else getting ads still? And is it interfering with the stream? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Excuse me while I just have a lot of water. You forgot your Prime sub is there, alas elsewhere. Hiram, there is absolutely nothing to apologise for there. Chrono, all good here. Okay, moving on. As I knelt, there came to me presently a vague wonder at the two accidents which had so nearly allowed the brute to get at me. Was I being influenced to unconscious voluntary movements that endangered me? The thought took hold of me, and I watched my every movement. Abruptly, I stretched a tired leg and knocked over one of the jars of water. Some was spilled, but because of my suspicious watchfulness, I had it upright and back within the veil while yet some of the water remained. Even as I did so, the vast black half-materialized hand beat up at me out of the shadows and seemed to leap almost into my face, so nearly did it approach. But for the third time it was thrown back by some altogether enormous, overmastering force. Yet apart from the dazed fright in which it left me, I had for a moment that feeling of spiritual sickness, as if some delicate, beautiful, inward grace had suffered, which is felt only upon the too near approach of the abhuman, and is more dreadful in a strange way than any physical pain that can be suffered. I knew by this more of the extent and closeness of the danger, and for a long time I was simply cowed by the butt-headed brutality of that force upon my spirit. I can put it no other way. I knelt again in the centre of the pentacles, watching myself more with fear almost than the monster. For I knew now that unless I guarded myself from every sudden impulse that came to me, I might simply work my own destruction. You see how horrible it all was. I spent the rest of the night in a haze of sick fright and was so tense I could not make a single movement naturally. I was in such fear that any desire for action that came to me might be prompted by the influence that I knew was at work on me. And outside of the barrier, that ghastly thing went round and round, grabbing and grabbing at the air at me. Twice more was the body of the dead cat molested. The second time I heard every bone in its body scrunch and crack. And all the time the horrible wind was blowing upon me from the corner of the room to the left of the bed. Then, just as the first touch of dawn came into the sky, that unnatural wind ceased in a single moment, and I could see no sign of the hand. The dawn came slowly, and presently the one light filled all the room and made the pale glare of the electric pentacle look more unearthly. Yet it was not until the day had fully come that I made any attempt to leave the barrier. For I did not know but that there was some method abroad in the sudden stopping of that wind to entice me from the pentacles. At last, when the dawn was strong and bright, I took one last look round and ran for the door. I got it unlocked in a nervous and clumsy fashion, then locked it hurriedly and went to my bedroom, where I lay on the bed and tried to steady my nerves. Peter came presently with the coffee, and when I'd drunk it, I told him I meant to have a sleep as I'd been up all night. He took the tray, went out quietly, and after I'd locked my door, I turned in properly, and at last got to sleep. Okay, I'm going to call that for this week and get the second half next Monday. Yeah, apologies. I had forgotten quite how visceral the demise of the cat was, although the cat does die quite quickly. It's just what happens afterwards. Wow, you guess that's not carbon monoxide. So, curious as to what you think of the first half of Gateway of the Monster. I think there is roughly almost as much again left. Because, of course, he has to investigate that it's haunted by a hand. But what's the deal? I did warn you. Yeah, I did. I content warned all over the place. I thought I'd rather content warn for everything than leave somebody going, "Why didn't you tell me?" Oh, I'm sorry. Now I'm just wondering, you would have a hell of a time doing this as one of the ghost stories for Christmas, wouldn't you? It'd be rather effective. But yeah, it would be tricky. It'd just be, effectively a two-hander. And thank you for saying that, Hiram. I am practicing the reading. I mean, I'm not terrible, but I'm trying to get as much practice in as possible for audition purposes, which is always fun. Ignoring the frankly brutal murder of the kitty, it's very fascinating. Even you're not that brutal, aside from your no animal harm. You're planning to read ahead, you think you'll enjoy it more like that. That's fair enough. You can get hold of this book, which is Carnacki the Ghost Finder. It's on Project Gutenberg. It's also available in all sorts of versions in ebook. So it's a collection of stories. Some of them are ghost stories. Some of them are investigations of a weird nature. And there's one that's completely non-magical entirely, and is, in fact, regarding a very old book. Oh, thank you, Alia. That is a lovely thing to hear. And yes, Kate, I did an audition this afternoon It was for, I believe, a e-training book. So I've no idea if I've got the sort of voice they're going to want, or whether I should have tried to do more along the lines of, now turn to page 5. You know, pretending to be pretending to be an AI. Yes, there was another story where it wasn't a ghost, just a very complicated burglar deterrent. That's The Thing Invisible. That's also in the same book, same collection as this. And by mixing it up between malice and mundane misinterpretation and the supernatural, going as far as cosmic horror. Believe me, we get one big cosmic horror story in that book. If you ever settle down to read The Hog, bear in mind it appeared in one of the Chaosium compendiums for COC. If you're the narrator of an audiobook that you paid for, you'd be happy. Oh, thank you, Honeybee. That's appreciated. My voice is relaxing but not boring, which is normally a rare combo for you. Cool. It's nice to have something. Alia, we may have to negotiate on that, but yeah, that's... having read, or having listened to you reading, some of your book, I would be more than happy. That would be something that would be awesome. Right. So yes, we'll get the second half next week, after which you can decide if you'd like any more Carnacki, or whether you'd like me to move on to a novel or other short stories. I'm happy to take requests, so long as they are out of copyright in the UK. I am safe with that. Or if I have permission of the author, like I did with Watson is Not an Idiot. Okay, Hiram. Go and cuddle, Narnia. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you guys all have a good rest of evening/night/day, depending on your time zones. So, good night, and I will hopefully see you next week. Bye-bye.